Okay, that will work. Basically, I want to just give a sort of broad discussion of how to think about the contribution of this work and sort of why it's important. Sometimes there's so many details involved in microstructure that people forget just why we're doing it and why we should be doing it. And so I just want to talk a little bit about the results that I think are important and also basically the results that I'd love to see or have some idea about. It's obviously very, very difficult when you're getting data that's potentially proprietary to try and find out everything, but we should always have this sort of big goal in our mind. I guess the events of the last year or so have basically indicated how extremely important it is to understand the trading process. Markets have seized up, and so we really need to understand how markets work, why they work, how the participants view markets, if we essentially want to have some sort of solution to this problem or have some sort of regulatory framework going forward. And there's sort of broader implications of markets. Prices formed every few minutes. Essentially, these are used by third parties in contracts. Basically, you can get options that are knocked in, knocked out, who knows what. But basically, there are all sorts of effects that happen that are contractual effects that are based on prices in any particular market. There's also this issue of resale, right? Financial viability very much depends on whether or not I can take my portfolio and liquidate it to get ready capital, or basically if I can go in and out of a position. So understanding the ability of people to get in and out of markets is very important. So we need to understand the trading process. And just at a broad scale, when we talk about treasuries or we talk about government securities, we're essentially talking about the government's ability to build up parks, to help with schools, and basically to make our lives better. So from a very, very personal point of view, it's always very important that the government has the best opportunities to raise funds. Thank you. So overall, what we've seen today, or the presentations, have just been a very careful and thorough study of liquidity. So liquidity is just the ability of traders to get into and out of positions. And at the same time, what happens when a market is liquid is that we get a ready stream of prices that other people can use in either their portfolio calculations or essentially in any kind of contracts and settlements. And what's sort of difficult about understanding liquidity is that it's just hideously complicated, right? In most of the models that we have, the very simple ones, there's a demand curve, a supply curve, they cross, and that's P star, which is the equilibrium price, and we can use that in our calculations and go home. But when you're talking about continuous markets, it's very, very difficult, or it's less easy to think about what the market clearing price is. And so one of the contributions of this work is just essentially to think about the complexity that comes about with liquidity and to think about how prices are formed. So essentially, they basically make very, very carefully point out that there are lots of different dimensions of liquidity, much more complex than our standard sort of neoclassical models. And they distinguish between essentially measures that capture what trades could happen, right, and what trades actually did happen. And there's sort of two different ways of thinking about prices, sort of potential prices and actualized prices. One way to think about this, or one way to talk about it, is in terms of ex-ante and ex-post liquidity. Okay? When you think about a limit order book with posted prices, to some extent this is ex-ante liquidity. So we don't know how people want to trade, but these are the ways in which they could trade if they so desired. Okay? Now, this doesn't completely capture liquidity, because once a trader enters the market, all sorts of things can happen. Right? A trader can come into the market and see essentially a price schedule, which is essentially how much he has to pay to get liquidity. And he can look at it and think, oh, I don't like that at all. And so he can essentially split his order. He can come back 3 minutes later. He can come back tomorrow. He can find some other instrument to trade in. Basically, there are lots of ways in which people can react to the situation that they see. In addition, the people who are in the market, who are essentially posting these liquidity schedules or posting quotes, can post more aggressive ones, less aggressive ones. They can put more volume. They can basically react to what they perceive as the order flow flowing in. And so, as the authors have very carefully looked at, both of these things are important and important to understand. So one of the things that, especially in the context of the current crisis, that sort of would be always very, very important to understand is essentially this notion of resiliency. So the analysis of the different types of orders and how they were autocorrelated and basically how they change over time and how they react to conditions in a book. This is essentially quite an important thing to look at because it, to some extent, it gives us an idea of how traders are viewing their trading options. Okay? And so the sorts of things that we want to know